Welcome everybody to another Best Practice Spotlight, a relatively new series we've been putting on to really focus on some of the best practices that you might not be aware of and you might not even be doing. With us today is Adam Cmejla. I personally have worked with Adam a ton in the past. I'm a big fan of his. He is with Integrated Consulting and Advisory Solutions. Now, just the best part about Adam is that he's come into the financial services profession way more than I have. It's not my background, but it's definitely his. Since 2007, he's maintained a passion for serving clients, not only in his practice, but also, on his practice. Prior to starting his practice, he spent time in the pharmaceutical industry. He was doing quality assurance associations there, where he was responsible for the root cause analysis and standard operating procedures for review, adaptation, and implementation. Now, that's one of the reasons I like Adam, because he's built a fast-growing fee-based practice, and he's found his additional passion, if you will, and ability in helping advisors, that's you guys, put in place systems, processes, procedures to help your practices run smoother and more efficiently, particularly the topic of today, through an efficient workflow system. Now, his blend of technology consulting, his expertise, as well as his first-person experience in running financial services practice gives him a unique perspective around how to empower other advisors to become successful practice owners in today's fast-paced, technology-driven environment. I am a personal firsthand witness of his dedication to helping as many advisors and their teams as possible in building these significant practices that are sustainable, transferable, scalable, and all of this is proven, is battle tested. His practice management and his workflow systems are second to none. And the last thing that I want to mention is that, Redtail, particularly myself, I don't really come from a financial platform background. I'm not an advisor. I'm a technology guy. That is where I think Adam's expertise will excel here. And so with all of that being said, I'm sure Adam has a nice big ego now. We'll go ahead and pass it off to him, and he's going to rap with you about some of the stuff that y'all should be doing with your workflow. So Adam, that being said, take it away.
No, Ricky, thank you very much for the introduction. And you're right, I'm glad I'm in my office because I don't think my head will fit through the door anymore with that introduction. But I certainly do appreciate the kind words and in introducing what we've done here and what we've done for advisors in the past. And our intention, and again, thank you everybody for taking time out of your practice today. Our intention is that the next 30 to 45 minutes is a good investment of your time. And I don't anticipate or expect you to take everything that we're talking about here today and say, all right, I'm going to go implement everything that Adam talked about. What I hope we can do is give you some clarity and some confidence around a couple of different key points that you can take back to your practices and implement with you and your team as it pertains to using workflows. Now, if you've been on workflows, if you've been using Redtail for a while and you've been using workflows, that's good. This is a good place for you to be, because what we're not going to do today is talk about the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of how to build a workflow, where to find them in Redtail, how to assign them to a contact. We're going to make the assumption at this point, this is kind of the 300 and 400 level courses of workflows, because we're going to make the assumption that you're implemented with workflow system, or you've at least dabbled into it to know how they work. You can kind of see the benefit to workflows, but you're just not quite sure if you're maximizing the best way and how to use them in your practice. And so as an advisor, and as Ricky had mentioned, I came into this business almost 9 years ago. I don't know, can I call myself a veteran yet after almost 9 years? I'll hold off on that until maybe I'm double digits into the business and profession. But I did come from the pharmaceutical industry, where the mantra that we had was, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. And that was the big key takeaway that I came into this business with, or lack thereof, I should say, as I got into this profession. I kind of say to people, we know what the A is, we know what the Z is, but we struggle as advisors in putting together that B to Y. We know that the beginning process is to, hey, let's bring on a client. And we know the end result is, great, money hit the account, policy's been delivered, and we now have a client. But executing and organizing and scaling the B to Y, the prospecting, the onboarding, the initial service, all of that aspect of client management, it seemed like there were 13,000 different ways that advisors were doing that, and that just ran against the grain for me as a quality assurance advisor and associate in my previous life, where we had a systematized way of doing the same thing the same way every single time. And the philosophy of workflows as it pertains to Redtail here is, or just workflows in general, and what we'll show you here today with some of the best practices and workflows, is all workflows do is tell who needs to do what, when it needs to get done, and for which client. And I'll repeat that again because that's the filter that I want you to run workflows through. It tells who in your office needs to be doing what task, for which client that task needs to be done, and when is it due by. And I say due by or due on or before by. And so, but what can very quickly happen, as we've seen I started this kind of consulting with other advisors and launching a full-scale business about 2 years ago now, because we started to see a lot of traction in some of the workflow systems that we had developed. And as we branched that out more and more and more, and we've worked with a lot of firms across the country, across all different business channels, whether it's an insurance-based firm, an advisory firm, a hybrid model, RIAs. We've worked with standalone RIAs that aren't affiliated with a broker-dealer, but we found a number of reoccurring themes and a number of hurdles that advisors and their teams were struggling to get over, or really struggling to grasp. They understood how workflows worked. They understood the benefit that workflows had to the system, to their office, but there were just certain hiccups and hangups that we saw them get stuck on, that once we coached them and empowered them to kind of bypass that hurdle, we found that they adopted and adapted the system much more efficiently in their practice. They had much more clarity around the growth in their business. And from a transferability standpoint, it gave business owners and practice owners the ability to really think about, how do I transition this business? How do I either transition my practice or grow it to the point of bringing on another advisor and have them do it the same way that I'm doing it? Now, one side note where this is also important, and this is just a plug for workflows or having some system in your practice, and I know if you're probably going to jump off a cliff if someone else says Department of Labor, but I'll do it anyway and hope you don't dive over head first. We've seen, as part of the documentation and part of the requirements within the Department of Labor ruling that came out, is that if you're going to be doing business under the BICE standard, the documentation that is going to be important for you to have on file is going to be even more important than it was in the past. And so having a good workflow system and understanding how to run your practice through the filters of workflows is going to help you abide by that BICE standard and make sure that you have a documented system in place to justify to a regulator, to a client, anybody that comes in your office asking, why are your fees such and such as compared to what I could get at Vanguard.com or any other low-cost provider. So having some type of documented system in place. But again, if we're not sure how we're going to do that, it's kind of a moot point, and we don't want you to become paralyzed there. So we've all seen this video most likely, or if you haven't, I'll play it here anywhere. Our life as a business owner is a finite resource, right? We all know that the premise behind this video is that we want to put the most important tasks that we have in our life, the most important tasks in our practice, into the jar first, and do those tasks first. If you haven't read Brian Tracy's book, Eat That Frog, great book on task management, and then we proceed to add the smaller tasks and less meaningful tasks, and so on, until finally we get down to adding the water, which are the least most important tasks. For me, 99% of that water I can sum up in one word: email. I hate email. It's the bane of our existence, but hey, it's what it is. But as we all know, it's very easy to get bogged down and sidetracked with the lack of understanding of urgent versus important tasks. If any of you have been out there reading Stephen Covey, or if you've read his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this is Covey's time management matrix. If you haven't read that book, probably one of the top 10 books I would recommend you picking up and reading. So the important thing to understand here is the difference between urgent and important. What ends up happening for most advisors is we spend a lot of our time in quadrant 1 here. We spend a lot of time in the important and urgent tasks, but the quadrant of leadership, which is quadrant 2, as we see there in the prevention, Those are the important but non-urgent tasks. And I promise I have a method to this madness and why we're spending time on this before we get to workflows. The intention here between workflow organization and prioritization from a task management standpoint is to make sure that you are spending as much time in quadrant 2 and as little time in quadrant 4 and 1 as possible. Candidly, your team members should be spending time in quadrant 3 and hopefully in quadrant 1, possibly even quadrant 4. I want you to be spending as much time as possible in quadrant 2. So just keep that in mind as we progress through the presentation today. So the question that I'll ask everybody here first is, how do you prioritize? What the ways in which you prioritize? Most of the time, what we see advisors have is we'll walk into an office and we do some on-site consults with advisors across the country as well, if they so choose and would like to engage us that way. And we've walked in to see walls full of sticky notes. We've seen walls full of poster boards. We've seen whiteboards that have their sales pipeline up there because they say it's easy to erase and write in. But none of that is scalable. None of it's transferable. The key between those two areas is that system lives and, I guess to go to a dark place here, lives and dies with the advisor or whoever's using that system. So it's very difficult if we look at an advisory practice like any other business. Forget the fact that you're a financial services business owner. Let's say you're a manufacturing firm. Every manufacturing firm, and this is what we had in pharmaceuticals as well, had a WIP, a work in progress. We knew at any given time where any given batch was on any given line. We can see when it started, when it was delivered, what step it was on, etc. And we knew that if we had turnover in our office, we had the ability to change someone out. Well, technology, as we see, has been able to help us mitigate some of the inefficiencies of paper systems, but it hasn't done it completely unless we're going through sorry, I just had a pop-up here that kind of stole my attention here. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So how organized are you? Again, we see a lot of different systems here, and we want to make sure that we're giving you a system here, not only from a workflow standpoint, but if you do have a workflow system, the fact that you're using Redtail as your CRM says and puts you in a different category among a lot of other advisors out there that don't even have a CRM. And if anybody on the call says that Outlook is a CRM, Ricky and I will personally come to your office and give you a couple slaps across the face, because Outlook is not a CRM. So the fact that you're using Redtail is a great way in how to prioritize. But the biggest challenge that we see from a systematization and automation standpoint is that we don't systematize and automate because everything right now is taking longer, which causes us to have the feeling of we don't have enough time, which then causes the tasks that build up to feel like they're more urgent than they are important, which then doesn't give us the time to systematize and automate, which then everything takes longer. And you can see how this never-ending negative cycle can come and really envelop a practice. And so what we did is we put together a list of the basic minimum processes needed. And again, this webinar is being recorded. If you do have a screenshot or a screen capture software, I'll pause here. By all means, take a screenshot or a photo with your phone. These are some of the basic workflow workflow processes at a minimum that we feel are important in any advisory practice. If you're providing quote unquote full service comprehensive financial planning, whether you lean more towards risk management or towards asset management, these are the key areas that we recommend having workflows in place. So with, again, the understanding that we are going to have, or that everybody on the call is at least familiar with workflows, how they work, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, let's dive into some of the best practices that we've seen and some of the suggestions I have for you. So sanity tip number 1. You see I have here notes, the repeating mantra of if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to slide a browser over here and demonstrate what I mean as we look at a couple of different examples in a dummy system that we have. So what we're going to look at here is, if I just pull up a contact record that we have here. Bear with me 1 second.
Hey, Adam, right now I'm only seeing your PowerPoint. There we go. Perfect.
There we go. Sorry, I was teeing it up on the other end there, Ricky.
It's all good. No worries, man.
All right, so if we're inside of a workflow, this is a workflow that we have for transfer of assets from one company to another. And again, we do a good job within our system of documenting a workflow system. Our interpretation and understanding of a workflow system is it should also be your operation. The difference between an operations manual that's in a 350-page Word document that sits on some file drive in your computer and the fact that an operations manual is built into your workflows, number one, it eliminates the need for redundant systems. If you change something in one, you know that your workflow system is already updated, your operations manual is updated. And number two, the benefit of doing it this way and documenting what needs to be done is that you can insert a new team member. And we saw this again just recently. We added another team member in the financial services practice. And we know that her onboarding time has been significantly decreased because of her ability to not have to ask us questions because she can go in and read the instructions, not only in the workflow, but in the actual list. But when I talk about notes, the important thing up here is when you're completing notes, make sure that you as an advisor and everybody in your team, and I'm kind of giving away the farm on my next tip here, but I'll save it, make sure that you're putting in notes into the workflow step every single time that you complete a step. What we'll see happen sometimes is, let's say I'm Jane Admin, I'm going to go in and complete this step. I'm going to create a drop down here and we submit the transfer of assets and I go ahead and complete the step. Well, now, great, that shows up that I completed this step on 7/27/16, but I have no idea what happened here. And more importantly, even if I know in my mind what happened, my practice manager, my assistant, a junior advisor that may be working on this, they have no idea, was this sent regular mail? Was it sent FedEx? Is there a tracking number? Did they need original signature? Was it the original wet signature? Was it faxed? All of that information is up in my mind where it could be documented in notes. So every time you complete a step in a workflow, build the habit of documenting something. It could be as simple as one sentence. It could be as simple as reference email chain on 5/23 for details. Something to prompt someone else on your team to know where to go to look for that information. So that's the first thing. If it's not documented, it didn't happen, that's applicable across all notes and even more specific within workflows. So, Sandy tip number 2, which again I mentioned kind of goes hand in hand with notes, is teamwork. Ensure that all of your team is on board, including you. And this is probably the biggest missing link that we see in an efficient workflow system. Typically, what we find is that staff in your practice will spend about, out of all the workflows, they will be using them 80% of the time. Or I guess another way to say it, 80% of the workflow tasks in your practice will and should be completed by someone on your team. Because if we look at it from a business revenue and from a business standpoint, as an advisor, you know what your value is and where you should be spending your time. In my opinion, advisors their time should be spent doing one of two things: meeting and servicing existing relationships, or meeting and cultivating potential clients. All other non-revenue generating tasks or unlicensed tasks, obviously trading a portfolio, things like that go hand in hand with that, as well as advisor duties, but everything else should be delegated to your staff. However, as I mentioned in step number 1, it's very difficult for you to delegate tasks if the downline, if the chain of command below you and in subsequent steps in your workflow has no idea what's going on. And part of it, again, I'll be the first to admit that some of these things here are do as I say, not as I do sometimes, because I am guilty along with everybody else on the call sometimes, as it pertains to making sure that I'm drinking my own Kool-Aid. But it is a challenge, and it is something that I believe that advisors need to be focused on, because what you'll find and what we would recommend from a best practice when you look at the workflow construction, if we go back and look at the example of the workflow that we have here, you'll notice that if I look at all the different tasks for this one workflow that we have for transfer of assets, the majority of these tasks are assigned to Jane Admin. The only one that really should be responsible from the advisor, and again, this is a dummy database, so we don't have it assigned here, but the advisor would be responsible for getting the information from the client, and that may not even be the case. The admin or practice manager could be even responsible for doing that. But the only thing that should really be the responsibility of the advisor is confirming with the client at the end of the day that the assets have transferred. Everything else should be delegated to your staff. So again, that's kind of an inherent best practice within Sanity Tip number number two, make sure that everybody is on board and that you as an advisor are making sure that you are only responsible for tasks that are revenue producing activities. Now, Sanity tip number three is build routines, habits, and consistency. What I mean by that is the ability to, every day that you come into the office, when you open up Redtail and you pull up your list of to-do lists, if we were doing this in live time and I had everybody in front of me, I would ask for kind of an in-room poll. And I know there's a way to do it on GoToMeeting, but candidly, I'm not a GoToMeeting ninja, so we're going to pass on that right now. But if I were to ask and do a poll on how many of you do a to-do list every single day, write down, maybe you've heard of Ron Carson's the top 5 in Vital One, or you've read Getting Things Done with David Allen and his GTD program of how to prioritize your tasks. If you're anything like me, before workflows, I had no shortage of probably 3 different to-do lists. I had it on Evernote, I had it on my phone, I had it on Outlook, I'd have emails. But now what you can do is make sure, and with a solid workflow system, you can forever eliminate the need for doing a to-do list because your to-do list is in your CRM. So what I mean by that is the ability for you as an advisor to know where to go within Redtail to find your to-do list. And again, this is predicated upon the belief and structure that you as an advisor are running your firm through the filter of workflow management, so that anything and everything that's relative to you running your practice, from bringing new clients on to servicing existing clients, everything should be in workflow. If it is, you as an advisor now have the ability, and this is one of the best features. I know Ricky and the team there at Redtail have done a phenomenal job with Tailwag and the update from Leapfrog. If you haven't converted yet to Leapfrog, this is another thing. I mean, maybe Ricky won't because he works for Redtail, but I'll come there and kind of give you a slip slap a little bit, because it is an amazingly great update as compared to what Leapfrog was. One of the best features and the best ways that they upgraded Redtail was on the reporting functions. So if we look at the reports down here, you'll see me go to reports, you'll see me go down to workflow reports, and now task reporting. I now, as the advisor, have the ability to pull from a 50,000-foot view of my practice every single task that's open in my practice. And it doesn't really matter who's responsible for doing it. Again, I can pull the list for everybody in my team, or using the filter side over here, I'm now able to go in here and say, you know what, I don't care what my team is doing. I have confidence in their ability to follow a to-do list. All I want to do is find out what I'm responsible for doing. Or let's say that in the context of our database here, I know that I also kind of double as Bill sometimes. So let me pull the advisor tasks that I have. I now have the ability as an advisor, and again, this is where one of the benefits that I try and bring to the table here for other advisors on the call is, I jokingly tell people I have enough ADD for 3 kindergartners, right? I have enough to keep my mind going for 36 out of 24 hours in a day. So to give me the ability to filter out the noise of everything else that's going on in the practice and be able to pull a list of my to-do list, what do I have to do, what's still outstanding, and to be able to go in to each individual workflow, click on it, see, okay, what do I need to do? This, and this. Great. Complete the steps. I've done them. And again, I'm demonstrating here. I can go back, sent to client via email secure attachment. I complete that step. Notice I'm abiding by number 1, entering my notes in. That's done. I know that this would go back to my practice manager or my admin. Boom. I can now go back, click the back button. I have one less task on my to-do list, and I can just pump through my to-do list step after step after step and go through all of my tasks. And if I look at this through the filter of being the CEO and president of a business, to know, number 1, have the confidence and clarity that my staff knows what they're responsible for doing, and number 2, it's an accountability feature for me to be able to go in and find out if things are slipping through the cracks, what's going on with advisor. Again, I'll just kind of, if I want to check in on my staff and see what they're doing, I can find out what they're responsible for doing. And if things are past due, one of 2 things either happens. Number 1, there's a conversation with the team member to understand what's going on. Again, this goes back to the root cause analysis. if it's not their fault, if they didn't miss it, we have to go back to the drawing board and figure out where the kink in the system was. Number two, it gives me the ability as an advisor to go in there and figure out, do we need to change the system? Do we need to modify, or are they overburdened with tasks? Are we piling too much on their plate? So it gives me that barometer to see how their to-do list is doing relative to everybody else in the firm. So that's where building routines, habits, and consistency gives you the ability to do it. Now, what do I mean by consume trees as sanity tip number 4? Call me a little old school here, and if you've never, if you haven't been to our website or anything like that, I think we have a photo on there. I'm 33. I look like I'm 12. My wife says I don't have gray hair to be 50 though, so I kind of cross all decades in one shape or another there. But I am pretty technology savvy. I do embrace technology, but I am old school in the sense of having printed reports. So what do I mean by the most important reports? I'll run this back to the filter of, as the advisor, making sure that you're spending your time on revenue producing activities. If I want to look at as an advisor, what do I need to be focused on doing? What I'm going to do, and what I do every single Monday morning, is I go in, I filter my reports, and then I also want to find out my prospecting report. And so for me, we have our prospecting report and again, it may not show up here just in our dummy database, but for a new prospective client workflow, this report in my practice, what do I got here? I have literally sitting on my desk here, 2 pages front to back. So what is that? Maybe 45 to 50 what we call prospects, and one of the next slides that we have goes into that difference. That's the most important thing that I physically want to have in front of me. Even though I just showed you how reporting in Redtail can help you stay in front of and filter the noise, I think a trump card to that, no pun intended, given the current election cycle that we're in, the trump card to having the electronic report is to have the physical report sitting on your desk, staring you back in the face every single day until you get that done. I found this to be beneficial. Other advisors that we've worked with as well has said that their desk is decluttered now because everything is in Redtail, so paper that does show up on their desk, they know it's important. And so having that report and being able to discuss that report at weekly team meetings with your staff, we typically recommend having at least 1 weekly staff meeting, usually 2, with a couple sporadic ones filtered in there if something is justified. Kind of bookend team meetings. A Monday morning meeting. What did we do last week? What do we have coming up this week? Anything that needs current addressing? On Friday, what did we do this last week? Is there anything that we need to prep for Monday morning before our team meeting? Having those reports handy and being able to go over with your team in person is a nice benefit. Sanity tip number 5. You'd think this is a very simple trick, but I can't tell you how many advisors that we've consulted with and their staff didn't know that you can have multiple different tabs of the same Redtail database open. So have multiple tabs of Redtail open. Most important, we feel that this is most important early in your adaptation of workflows, because if you're working on building workflows from the scratch and you're not using it, or excuse me, you haven't implemented a workflow system, kind of a plug and play system from someone like ourselves or a couple of other providers out there, a lot of time can be spent, obviously, not only at just the initial drafting of the workflows, but then equally, if not more importantly, going over and going back to revising what you found that didn't work. So if you're in a workflow that didn't work, we always recommend having the last tab in your database open to show all of your workflow templates, so that if I'm working in a client right now and I'm going through all this list, all these things, and I get to a fork in the road and I kind of get backed up in my workflow and I know that I need to change something, I know that if I change it within the workflow that's attached to the client, that does nothing to address the template unless I go ahead and save that as a template in the future. But if you're going to go ahead and make that change, make sure that you're doing it at the root, make sure you're doing it at the source. And so go into your template database that you have here, which is, you can access workflows, again, I'm assuming most everybody knows this, under a manage your account in your workflow template. So have the last tab open to workflow templates. That way, again, you can just kind of These first 3 tabs are kind of your working tabs. One of them should always be in your workflow task report, as we see here. Another one is usually going to kind of be your wildcard, your floating tab that you use to click around from different areas within Redtail. And then most likely this one will always be on an existing client or some contact that you're currently working on. But have that one open for your templates just to make sure that that you can go ahead and quickly modify those. By doing this, again, rather than having to, even though Redtail has, again, with Tailwag significantly increased the user friendliness and user interface, having multiple tabs open just allows you to increase efficiency. Sanity tip number 6, again, kind of goes on, you'd think it goes without saying, but understand your process, and I mean really understand it, down to the point of when does someone become a lead, when do they become a suspect, when do they become a prospect and the client, and make sure that you have that process documented, not only in your practice, but understand how does the workflow system that you're creating complement the process that you have in place. And again, this is just our lead generation process, kind of a tip and deliverable that we give to advisors that choose to work with us. We've got ones for client onboarding process. We've got service models for client service. And again, this is, if you're building your own workflow system, just make sure that you have your blueprint, make sure that you have your foundation in place of how you bring clients and relationships into your life and into your practice, and then build your workflows around that. What we've seen happen is that advisors will spend so much time because they've scrubbed in on a couple of webinars thinking that we've got to have all these workflows, and then they try and plug them into the way that in which they serve clients, and they realize that it doesn't necessarily work that well because they tried to benchmark it off of just a generalized way of doing things rather than their own exact way of doing things. So understand how your system works and how that plays into your Redtail system. Number 7 here, and I believe this is our last tip that we're going to go through here today, know your reports and your KPIs. KPI stands for key performance indicators. Again, from an advisor standpoint, the most important thing is to understand your opportunity tracker, which again, Redtail did a great job of breaking out within the new system of Tailwag. So understand what you have currently open in new business, understand what you've currently won, and how all of these are tied into workflows. Every single person that's in an opportunity should be attached to a workflow in some way, shape, or form. But understand your reports, understand your key performance indicators, and to make sure that you understand, again, I can't emphasize enough, if you're going to learn one area of Redtail as it pertains to workflow management, learn how to utilize, filter, and sort through the task report. And then again, it's an easy way to toggle back and forth up here just within workflows. So the difference that I'm showing here, workflow task report gives me the ability to see all the different tasks that are outstanding, which we can see, again, we have a lot of them here in our database. If I want to click on workflows, I can see just what workflows are attached to client. It's not going to be as robust because we all know that within this workflow, there might be 3 open tasks if there's 3 tasks on one step. But this is my 30,000-foot view, and then from there, again, I can drill down even deeper as it pertains to the tasks associated with clients. But really understand and make this part of your habit to know how to utilize the reporting features within Redtail and some of your key performance indicators and what you and benchmarking data points that you want to see in Redtail. So I believe that was it. So those are the top 7 things, again, that as we were thinking about previous advisors and previous firms that we've served that we could share with everybody in the call today. Ricky, I will kind of punt it back over to you here and see. I have GoToMeeting over here, but I haven't really looked at questions. What do we have going on here today? Being sensitive to time, I think we were trying to keep this to 45 minutes, so I apologize. I rambled a little bit there.
It's all right, man. I thought it was great. You brought up some really, really good points, things that maybe me as a Redtail, employee don't necessarily get to hammer home as much as I want to. But a lot, knowing your process. And you actually brought up a really good point I'm going to steal, which is if you're using Redtail the way that it should, then it should declutter your desk, therefore making what any type of paper that does slide across your desk that much more important. I actually really like that point. So I will give you credit, but I'm gonna steal that.
I'll send you the bill.
Okay, good deal. As you can see, everybody on the webinar, we have Adam's contact information. If you are like me and you think Adam knows what's up and you would like to get in contact with him, maybe rap about this a little bit further, then you can find his contact information right there on the slide. I do have one question that I think would be helpful for the recording, and that is when you're building the workflows, you have a list of who it's assigned to. Now, the question was, do you duplicate multiple workflows for each of your staff members? How potentially can you handle part of that?
That is a good question, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that should have been Sandy tip number 8. Yes, we do. Now you'll notice, let me go back into let me pull up our workflow database, our template database here. You'll notice that for this one we have, and again, we've done some modifications in this one. What I would do and what I'm going to do right now is go ahead and clone this one, and I'm going to punt it back to the original, and I'm going to go ahead and rename this to be advisor. Because what we find is that, especially in a multi-advisor office, you want the ability to go ahead and quickly see what workflows are assigned to which advisor or which team member there. Now, you don't have to do it this way. That is a quick way to see from a naming standpoint whether or not the workflow is assigned to, if this was Bill Smith and this one was John Doe, right? You could quickly see that. You can also see that differentiating factor if you go into your reports and I want to find out all the workflows that are assigned to Bill, what did I say here? To Bill Advisor. So I can use the same template for the same advisor and just make sure that when I go and assign that workflow to someone in the firm, that I assign that workflow to Bill Advisor. Does that make sense and answer the question?
Yeah, that's about the route I was going to go as well. I thought that was a really good question. But other than that, everybody, Adam, again, I want to thank you for your time today. You know, we've worked in the past. You always have good points to make out. That's why we keep you around. But for everybody else, for everybody else who is on the call, again, I thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. I want to make sure that if you do have any questions, obviously you can reach out to Adam with his contact information right there on the screen. And if you do need more information about Redtail, about building workflows, you can reach out to our support team at 800-206-5030 and then option 3 for support. But other than that, everybody, that's it. Thank you so much for your time today. Adam, thank you for your time, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you, Ricky. I appreciate the opportunity and privilege, and thank you, everybody else, for taking the time.